At this session, we focus on the school committee. We have 4 candidates for 2 open positions, 2 3-year positions. Stephen A. Nelson is the incumbent, and we have challengers Catherine A. Bond, Carl Foss, and Adam Sinesi. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll begin with the ground rules. Here's how we will proceed. Each candidate will offer a 1-minute opening statement, and we've drawn lots to determine the order. By the way, we'll keep that same order for closing statements. After that, our press panel will ask questions of each of the candidates. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer. I'll try to give you a high sign when you have about 30 seconds left. We'll rotate between members of the press panel asking the questions as well as the candidates for first response. If the questioner has a follow-up after that, we'll allow that as well. Next, the candidates will each be allowed to ask 1 question of all of the other candidates, again with 90 seconds to respond. Finally, each candidate will give a 2-minute closing statement. In the interest of covering as many subjects as possible, we'll keep a close watch on the time, so please frame your answers accordingly. If everyone's all set, we will begin. And let's see, by lot, we have decided that Mr. Sinesi begins. You have 1 minute.
All right, so please let me start by saying thank you to BCAT, the local press, who's here to cover this evening, my fellow candidates, and of course the viewers at home. Massachusetts is the home state of the legendary Horace Mann, and education is something that's in our state's DNA. Public education is important to me as it's played an important role in creating the man that I am today. I believe that the Burlington Public Schools offers an outstanding product and for our children who are the students of the future and who are our future. Really, the continuation of our country and our way of life and our town and all of these great things are dependent on these youngsters who are coming through the schools, and that should be important to all of us. I see that buildings and infrastructure are the biggest challenges our schools face in the next 5 to 10 years, and I feel that my background, having served on town meeting and as vice chair of the Capital Budget Committee for the last 5 years, has positioned me well with experience for this position. I have been on 2 building committees, including the Fire Station 2, which is along the Middlesex Turnpike, as well as the Department of Recreation and...
Can you wrap it up?
Yes. So I just want to say I've got 2 children. In addition to my town work, I do have a real job. I'm a BU grad. I'm also an autism dad, and I've also been the Fox Hill Mystery Reader.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good evening, fellow residents. My name is Steve Nelson, and I'm running for re-election to the Burlington School Committee. I'm an actual graduate of the Burlington High School. I attended the high school the first year it was open, and I've been involved in Burlington education pretty much ever since. I'm running for re-election because I'm very passionate about education. My spouse is a teacher. One of my sons is a teacher. And I believe that the most important thing that a community does is to educate its young children. I believe that I would make a good re-election candidate because I have a great deal of experience serving on the committee. Prior to serving on the Burlington School Committee, I served on the Ways and Means Committee for 3 years. I was the chairman of the Education Subcommittee that overlooked all of the budgets in the town. I was also the Board of Selectmen's designee to the MBTA Advisory Board, and I wrote reports for the Board of Selectmen on the meetings that we were having in Boston with the MBTA Board. And I also served on the Beeline Advisory Committee. So I had a great deal of experience before I was elected to my first term as a school committee member.
We're almost wrapped up.
Back in 1996. And I think that over the years, my track record establishes that I can continue to serve the community well going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And third, Ms. Bond.
Hi, thank you, BCAT and press and the moderator. I've lived in Burlington for 24 years, and my daughter is a recent graduate. I have a broad understanding of our schools K through 12. Professionally, I'm a principal logistics specialist with Raytheon. Currently, and for the past years, I've been on the BHS School Council, and as members, we have been working closely with the principal and guidance, reviewing the budget and changes in policy. We resolve concerns of parents and students, and we get really good communication back and forth. I want to continue to enhance the great reputations our schools have earned. My community involvement includes serving on the following boards of directors: BHSA, the Burlington Swim and Tennis Club. I'm the current treasurer of the Winchester Figure Skating Club and have been for the past 10 years. Other volunteering includes being a Pop Warner cheer coach mom, and we've won many national championships. And I'm also been a volunteer for the Burlington Education Foundation for the past 15 years. This involvement has strengthened my bond with many of the wonderful people, the children, and our outstanding teachers in the community. These invaluable connections really forged my decision to run for school committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Foss.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Melissa and Chris and Rich, for the questions, and my fellow candidates for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about myself. There are really three main points I'd like to make today. The first is that I'm a father. I have 2 children. My son is 8. He's in 2nd grade. My daughter is 6, and she's in kindergarten. Hello, Tommy and Callie. So what that means is I have a real personal interest in ensuring that we continue the success in making our schools in Burlington the positive and productive places that we have come to know. The second part about me is that I'm a teacher. I have been an educator for 10 years, and I'd like to give a shout out to all the students in room 20. I'm going to be showing you this tomorrow or whenever we go back to school. But democracy in action, that's what I always say. And so being an educator for 10 years, I have the experience to hit the ground running and really support the students in the classrooms, and to give a great deal of support to the teachers, administrators, and other staff at each of the schools in Burlington. The final point I'd like to make is that I am on town meeting, and as a taxpayer, in my role in town meeting, I have participated in the budget process, and I'm familiar with the task of balancing the needs of the schools with the interests of the taxpayers in town. I feel that the 3 aspects of my experience give me a very strong voice and a fresh voice, something that can represent all the constituents in town, and I will represent all those voices in my role on the school committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For the second round, we're going to give you a little bit more time. You've got 90 seconds. I'll try to mix up the first responders in each case too, just to make it fair, so it isn't always the same order. And the same with the questioners. So the first question, we will begin with Melissa Russell, and the first one to answer it will be Steve Nelson. Ms. Russell.
Hello, candidates. In the interest of introducing you to the community, can you provide an example, either from your professional life or your personal life, where you've had to stand up and show strong leadership?
I'm going first, Mr. Moderator?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Well, I think I would like to focus on my tenure on the school committee. When I first got on the school committee, the special education budget was part and parcel of the general education budget. And over the years, we would find that we would have unexpected influx of students with special needs in town, and the budget would be frozen for regular education. So that was a real problem, because freezing the regular education budget wasn't fair to the students, and it created a great deal of tension. So one of the things that I advocated strongly for, and we had to work with the Board of Selectmen, and we had to work with Ways and Means to accomplish this, was to move the out-of-district placements for children with special needs into what we called the accommodated account. So we created a new account on the town side of the budget, not on the school side of the budget, so that when children came into the town with serious needs that the local education couldn't meet, and they had to be placed out of district, the tuitions would be paid for out of the general budget without having to put a freeze on the regular education budget. So that's one of the accomplishments that I'm most proud of. I really feel like we have to take care of all of our students and learners in the system, particularly children with special needs, and that's one of the best ways to do it.
Thank you very much. Same question, Catherine Bond.
So I'll go back to some of the experience I've had in some of the volunteering. I really believe that our children need, and especially our girls, have a problem with self-image every once in a while. And one of the most recent examples of my having to step up and speak up for not only the parents' concerns, but also the students' concerns. My daughter was on the junior varsity cheerleading team on the soccer field, along with all of her other cheerleaders. And they were wearing uniforms that were probably 20 years old. which is fine. You know, we're all for saving money and all that kind of fun stuff. But the cheerleaders were feeling very uncomfortable in them. Most of them didn't fit. Their rear ends were hanging out. It just wasn't appropriate. And a lot of the parents were noticing that as well. And so I decided that, you know, to advocate for the students and for their parents, again, to help our kids feel better about themselves. So I went to the athletic department, and then I presented my case. I had showed them photos of the girls on the field, let them know that the girls were really feeling uncomfortable in their skin, which, you know, doesn't help them. They already have enough self-image problems as it is. And so as an end result for that, we were able to get new uniforms for all of the that group of cheerleaders. So I, you know, really feel that, you know, if I'm approached in this position, I'll take that same passion to help, you know, our students and our teachers.
Thank you very much. Same question, Mr. Foss.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The example that comes to mind for me as far as being showing a sense of leadership is what I do every day. And I go to school, and between the 5 classes that I teach, I have roughly 130 students in my classroom every day. And one of the things that you want to do as an educator, especially at the middle school level, is to provide a strong level of character education. And in that sense, you have to lead by example. And in the way that you interact with each student in front of you, in the way that they observe you interact with other staff members, in the way that they observe you interact with their parents at meetings. These are all examples of how you want to lead by example and show that you want to treat everyone with respect and put your best foot forward. And more specifically, some of the curriculum that we teach in the social studies department in Lowell is also leading by example. And the phrase is, you want to be the change that you want to see in your community. And that is one of the reasons why I'm running, is to show that if you want to make change in your community, you need to step up and get involved and get into the issues that matter to you. One of the curriculum programs that we use is called Generation Citizen, and one of the aspects of that is to go into Boston, and I took a select group of kids with me, and they get to see democracy in action.
Thank you very much. And the same question, Mr. Sinisi.
Yeah, so my favorite example of leadership that I've been part of is actually one of my proudest accomplishments as a town meeting member. A few years back, we were having issues with the contamination of 1,4-dioxane at the Vinebrook, in the wells at Vinebrook, and we were having water shortages in town because that created the wells being shut down. And you know, there was a demand at the town meeting level for a solution. So what we did was, town meeting, under the guidance of the moderator, formed a committee to study the water issue. And we worked in conjunction with the selectmen to address the issue, and we looked at all of the facts. And originally, when we had gone into this process, what we called the Water Study Committee, that consisted of some of the best meetings of town, the best members of town meeting, including Mrs. Bond's husband, Brad. And what we did is we looked at all of the facts, and we came to an understanding of what was driving the consumption of water in Burlington. And we studied all of the different ways that we might be able to leverage the resources that we had. And at the time, the idea of going on MWRA was a politically risky position, for one, and it was really a politically unpopular position. But what our committee did is we made sure we had a very inclusive process that included the entire community. We made sure that when our committee met, that members of town were aware of it, and we posted that the meetings would be happening on social media. We conducted an entire educational process and seminars to build consensus across the community. And eventually, the measure to partially go on to MWRA passed town meeting overwhelmingly, despite at the prior being very unpopular. And I think people are happy with the outcome.
Okay, we'll move on to our second question. This one will come from Chris Huffaker, and we will begin with Catherine Bond.
All right, so I think we all recognize that there are serious infrastructure building challenges facing the district over coming needs. So I think an important question is, how do you decide what to prioritize when looking at what schools, what buildings, where to look at advancing first and where to look at trying to get state money?
That's a good question. So, I think that what we have to do is look to the experts who can come in and observe that. I think we need to talk to the principal of the school, the superintendent, and the teachers, because they're the ones who are living it every day. We also need to talk to the maintenance folks. I realize that we're having a major problem with the HVAC system in the high school, and you really have to prioritize what's going to affect the teachers and the students, because if you have no heat, clearly you can't come to school in the wintertime. As far as looking at the high school and the science labs, we need to make sure that we get those updated so that we can take care of all of our students, whether they're AP students or not AP students, whatever they are. We need to make sure they have the right tools, because we want to make sure they're prepared for when they go off to college. As far as the elementary schools are concerned, it's the same thing. We need to evaluate the overcrowding of Fox Hill and some of the other infrastructure issues at Pine Glen. And in terms of prioritizing, again, it's listening to the principals of the school and listening to the people who are living in those buildings every day, and then prioritizing based on what we're hearing from each of those groups.
Thank you. Same question, Adam Sinessi.
All right, so the way that I see this is that at this point, when the high school is having issues with the boilers and HVACs, when those go, they're gonna go, and we might as well just get them fixed now. Instead of slapping another Band-Aid on the problem, we should fund it in the immediate. As far as the other infrastructure issues coming down the pipeline, the elephant in the room is the Pine Glen and the Fox Hill with the incoming populations that are coming into the school system. And how do we address those? We just don't have the square footage to house the amount of students that are going to come into the system. So how do we prioritize that? Well, I'm going to look at it from three things. First, let me rewind. I definitely want to get the input from the experts, the teachers, the administrators that are in those buildings. I want to hear from the parents in those schools, for which I'm one of them. I have a child in the Fox Hill. But most importantly, I think we need to look at the quality of any project versus the cost. But number one is really monitoring the disruption to learning that could occur during a construction project. And my biggest concern is that any renovation to the Pine Glen facility, that it could not be done with the students currently in the building. There just isn't enough room on that property that abuts conservation land. That I see as an issue. But again, anything, we want to solicit as much state money as possible. We also have energy efficiency upgrades that we need to make as we've become a designated green community, and we will get state funding for some of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question, Steve Nelson.
Thank you. The question was, how do you prioritize? And I think that it's a two-part answer to that question. Number one, when you're looking at overcrowding, you would think that that would be the number one priority. So we have to address the overcrowding in the schools. But then when you look at the high school, and as Mr. Sinessi said, if the boilers aren't functioning, you can't open the school. So right now the school committee is kind of going on parallel paths. We're prioritizing the high school. We asked the state for 6 or 7 years in a row to please fund a $70 million project. That $70 million project would have taken care of the HVAC, the code requirements, and also the science labs, all in one fell swoop. We were rejected 6 or 7 times in a row. So we finally realized that the state just is not going to approve the town of Burlington for that project. So now we have to potentially phase it in. We're looking at doing the HVAC system maybe as phase 1 and asking town meeting to put that on their bonding schedule, and then to do the science labs as phase 2, because there's only so much the bonding schedule can absorb in the town of Burlington. Then at the same time, we want to move forward with architectural studies for the Fox Hill program. We'd like to build a new school on the Fox Hill site. We believe that we can get state approval for a new building there, but it takes anywhere from 6 to 8 years. I believe it was 8 years for the memorial school, from the time we first started pushing for the funding till the time we actually started constructing the school itself. So we want to work on parallel courses. They're both important projects. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Kyle Voss.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The opponents have all made excellent points, and I'm going to echo them and just add on a little bit. I do believe that you need to listen to all the different parties involved. Mr. Kuna and Mr. Conti, or Dr. Conti, they gave a list to the school committee just the other night at the school committee meeting, and they said, here are basically our wish list, and here's the things that we need to do right away. And so you want to listen to the administration and make sure that you are kind of echoing your support for what their priorities are. But then you also have to listen to the principals at the school. And I had a meeting with Deb Dressler just the other day at Memorial, and she gave me a tour of that beautiful facility. You want to see that kind of fantastic learning environment at each of the sites if it's feasible, because as it was also mentioned, you want to listen to the architects and designers and decide what is actually possible at each site. But finally, you also want to listen to the parents, because if you're in the Fox Hill district and there is a large school built on that site, they're worried about traffic issues and a very large school environment. You want to try to preserve the small school environment that we have. The 4-school model is something that I think that a lot of parents want to make sure that we continue in Burlington. So it's a very delicate process to try to make the decisions on what to do first. And again, we have applied for state funding for the high school for many years in a row, and it has never come through. I know that the hope is that if we apply for funding for an elementary school, that the state will look at it differently. And you just have to make sure that the bottom line is equitable and fair for everyone involved.
Okay, thank you. We move on to our third question. This comes from Rich Hosford, and it'll first be directed to Calfoss.
Okay. As the survey, the risk behavior survey always shows, Burlington students, like students across the country, do engage in risky behaviors. How do you believe that the school committee can help create a safe environment that encourages better habits and successful learning?
Thank you, Rich. First, I think that we should give the risk behavior survey more often. As an educator, it is surprising how fast things change in the schools and what the new risky behavior the students decide to engage in can change from year to year. So you don't want to make sure that you're working with the most up-to-date data. The second thing that you want to do is make sure that you are encouraging the students and providing the survey in a way that they are comfortable and feel that they can be completely honest. And so it needs to be done in a way that they trust in the person that's asking them the questions. That way you get a reliable result. Once you have the results, you need to look at them carefully and make sure that the programming that you recommend as a school committee is responsive to that. You can't just put in some sort of blanket social, emotional, or risk mitigation curriculum. It needs to be targeted toward what you see at the results of, or what you see from the results of those surveys. I think that Burlington does a
About
good
10
job
seconds.
in responding to what the students' needs are. I want to make sure that it is done in a targeted and effective way.
Thank you. Steve, the same question.
Thank you. Yeah, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey has been a survey that we've done probably for 8 or 9 years now. Every other year the survey is conducted. And the results of that survey to me have always been very, very alarming. And I think it focuses in on the fact that we don't actually, I think, as parents, understand the level of insecurity that our students are undergoing during the course of their high school experience. When you see statistics where 24% of the students that answer the survey indicate that they feel sad or depressed for a 2-week period in a row or longer, it's alarming. And when you see that 12 or 13% of students in the Middlesex County area have prepared a plan for suicide, you realize that the emotional well-being of our students is something that we really have to focus on. Last year we added an adjustment counselor to the Burlington High School. to hopefully address that. I'd like to see another adjustment counselor added this year into our budget because that's what we need to do. Is we need to support students that are struggling. We need to identify the ones that are struggling and get to them early and make sure that we provide the services that they need. We have a wellness committee in Burlington, and in the high school director of health and education is part of that wellness committee along with other community members, and they had a recent summary, and they made 12 recommendations, and a lot of it was education of teachers, education of parents, and education of students about the significance of the problem and how to address it.
Thank you. Adam.
Yeah, so I think it's on us to continuously take a multi-pronged approach. Part of that approach is the curriculum in the classrooms, whether it's the health classes, and, we always need to recalibrate the curriculum to make sure we're addressing the next issue coming down the pipeline, because the things that today's problems are, the problems that we're seeing today aren't going to be the same problems that we're seeing tomorrow. I think, a good athletics program like we have at the high school that does not require, additional payments from the families. I think that keeping the students busy is an important thing to keeping people out of trouble. I think working closely with the local youth and family services in the town to provide a coordinated approach for some of the students that are at risk. But one area that I think that we need to address is we all recognize the importance of technology in our curriculum, but there are a lot of studies coming down the pipeline, and Mr. Nelson had implied depression within youth, and they're linking screen time to the students are spending on their laptops and iPads to depression. And I don't know if it's an issue of people seeing that their friends are doing things and they have a case of FOMO, fear of missing out. But this is clearly an issue that, as I said, we should always be recalibrating curriculum. We may want to take a look at how people are using how they're using technology, and if we should be maybe not using it less, but using it smarter.
Thank you. And finally, Catherine.
Yeah, so as far as a safe environment with the testing that's been going on, I'm going to mirror a lot of what he said, some of the words right out of my mouth. About a third of our students are feeling sad and depressed for a 2-week period of time, and that's really scary to me as a parent. I want to make sure that our teachers and the students are giving the proper information, whether that's through pamphlets or through the counselors, guidance counselors in the school providing information. Bring in mentors if we can. I'm sure we can bring in speakers without cost to the school. I actually know someone that I went to high school with who actually played for the Red Sox that I was trying to bring in a couple of years ago. He actually had a son who committed suicide, very unexpected, and I wanted to bring him in and talk about his program called the I Love You Man program, and how the friends from your high school actually, when his son committed suicide, he found that it was the high school friends that came back and supported him the most. And I think that, if we can bring in the right tools, educate our students on when they have risky behavior, again, if they're feeling suicidal or students are, drinking alcohol or, trying to test the water with vaping and drugs, that if you teach them how it affects their body, how it affects their family, it really, if they can bring it home and see it and experience from people who've been through it, I think it will help them out a great deal.
Thank you very much. For the next question, we return to Melissa Russell.
Candidates, nobody runs for an office in order to maintain the status quo. So what do you see that could be improved on the school committee, and how are you the person to make that happen?
And we'll begin with Adam.
All right, so I believe that I've served on town meeting for several years, and I've always believed that we can sort of govern by consensus and try and move opinion. And I believe that is always done with the best communication possible. And I do think that there is room for the current school committee to improve some of their communications with the other bodies in town, particularly town meeting, obviously, and I would think the selectmen creating a bonding schedule for the next 10 years, getting them on the same page with some of the infrastructure issues that we're looking to improve. I found it a little bit disappointing a couple of years ago when there was a budget shortfall that the default position was to sort of dig heels in and resist change and looking at new ways to fix the accounting practices that were happening. I understand why the budget shortfall happened. It was disappointing that it wasn't known about until after the fact. I felt like there was reluctance to bring on a business administrator as they've brought on. And I don't understand why it had to take so many meetings and why there was a defensive crouch when I really felt like there was a lot of room to get out in front of the issue. And just by better communication. And I hope to bring better communication and transparency and inclusiveness.
Oh, 10 seconds.
I'm done.
Oh, good. All right, same question. Carl.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Even a fantastic school system still has some students that fall through the gaps. And what I would like to take a look at as a school committee member is how we can close those gaps and make sure that we are fully meeting the needs of all students. Those that have a diagnosed disability, the services that the special educators provide, for the most part, is good, and there are certainly improvements to be made here and there, but what I'm concerned about is stuff that is not as obvious. And the school does a good job with their RTI program, but I think that it could be strengthened, and that the services that are provided to students that don't have a diagnosed disability could be strengthened as well. And when we look at things like the ability to read at grade level, there are, if you look at the data, there are some spots where we could make improvements. When you look at the statistics on reading levels by gender, especially as they get into middle school and high school, I think with a few small tweaks that we can make improvements there as well. Yeah, I think that we do a good job, but we can make improvements.
Great, thank you. And let's see, where are we? Next up is Catherine.
Okay. So, as far as change, I actually was having a conversation at an event recently with somebody whose child was just diagnosed with autism. And I personally, have not experienced that, but one question I had is, if you're not from here, you don't know anyone from the Burlington area, how do you know who to go to, and how do you get acclimated in terms of what to expect when you're entering that elementary school level? I know there are all kinds of people who are there to assist, but is there a transition? Is there some sort of a parent group that is formed to really sit down and educate those people? And it seemed to me, from talking to this person who's from out of town, yes, she had, there are 10 groups of people who are coming at you, but when it comes to just getting the basic information for when you're starting into the elementary school, maybe we need to find a way to smooth that over a little bit better. Something else, at least from the high school level, I really feel like we need to try and put some sort of policy in place or something in the student handbook so students understand homework deadlines. When we went to school, your homework was due the next day when you showed up in class. I see homework being due over the weekend at midnight. At midnight, are we encouraging our kids to stay up past midnight when we already know they lack sleep? So I just want to make sure that we're looking at these things,
10 seconds.
Through the school committee and addressing them accordingly.
Thank you. And finally, Stephen.
Thank you. I think there's two different things that I'd like to emphasize in terms of change going forward. First of all, we have building needs, and I think that we need to address those, and that's one of the reasons I'm running for school committee, because I think I've got a lot of experience working with improving the schools. I was on the building committee that recommended to the school committee to take back the Francis Wyman. The Francis Wyman School was rented out to Northeastern University and then the training council for the deputy sheriff's office. And we decided to take back that school, renovate it completely, and turn it into an elementary school. And then as a school committee person, I've been on the committees that have made the decision to rehabilitate and add on to the Marshall Simons Middle School. That project came out very well. We got state funding. The Memorial School building, I was a part of that committee that worked on that project for many, many years. I think we built that building under budget. It was under $30 million, and the state paid 52%. So I think that that's one of the areas of change, is getting our, keeping our facilities up to speed. The other thing, we had a bunch of elementary teachers appear before us, and we've also had high school and middle school principals appear before us, and they've all told us about the need for staffing. They want to increase the staffing levels because they have needs in the special education area, instructional assistant areas, and also as in math tutoring. So you need a strong advocate to make sure that we get the funding that's necessary to implement those changes and keep our programs as good as they can be.
Thank you. The next question, we return to Chris Huffaker. And just to let you know, we'll begin with Steve Nelson again. Chris?
Okay.
Thank you.
So candidates, the Burlington's State Accountability Report for 2019 showed that the district was making substantial progress towards targets, and that partly reflected strong performance on the MCAS relative to the state, relative to past years. But that was not evenly distributed. There are some groups, economically disadvantaged students, high needs students, students with disabilities, that in certain tests declined or otherwise were not making the sort of progress you might hope to see. What do you see as your role on the school committee in putting forward policies or advocating to help those students succeed academically?
And we begin with Mr. Nelson.
I think we've touched on some of those things. We want to make sure that we have adequate staffing to help. We need some one-on-one instruction with some students with special needs. And if we're doing an inclusion model where you have students with special needs in the classroom, which I think is the best model, you might have 2 or 3 students, and there might only be one instructional assistant working one-on-one with one of them, and the other 2 don't have enough support. So we have to make sure that we get additional support. And there's only so many teachers that we can add from year to year, because we have some restrictions from the town side on how much they can afford to pay, and we would like to have them all in one year. We have 22 new positions proposed in our budget this year. And if we get 3 or 4 of those new positions, we'll be happy. And I have to say, we're probably, every one of the new positions is going to be in special education area, except for a nurse. And the nurse takes care of such vital needs. So I think that's the area that I would focus on when you're looking at groups that aren't making the progress that you'd like to see.
Thank you. Next up is Ms. Bond.
So again, I mirror some of what you were saying. That we need to make sure that we're getting the one-on-one staffing where needed. If we see that there is a way to combine, several students together with one person, I think that helps them with, again, feeling included in the classroom environment. I also know that at the elementary school level, we are doing the response to intervention. And that's targeting students who have, some sort of a deficit in terms of their learning with reading and math. They're grouped on their ability, and it's a very fluid movement where they're moving up and down, and we need to continue those programs to make sure that our students don't fall behind. And maybe we can look into doing something like that or a similar program at the middle school level, if there's something that could mirror that program. And then also at the high school level.
Thank you. Mr. Foss, the same question.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, Chris. I think that in order to continue with Burlington's success in making progress toward our targets, it needs to come down on a more granular level. And one of the things that we do in the classrooms is ongoing formative assessments, and that is checking in frequently on where students are, what their abilities are, and what their needs are. And what you do with that data as a result of those formative assessments is you provide targeted interventions on the deficits that the students have. Catherine mentioned RTI, and that is a strong program, but I think that Burlington could do more. I think that if a student is targeted using RTI and they are not making progress, maybe you need to move forward and provide a stronger intervention. We need to educate parents more on what RTI is. I don't think a lot of parents are as knowledgeable as they should be about what the program is and what the results should be if their student is not making progress. They can advocate for their child. Teachers are very strong advocates for the children in schools, and as a result of that advocacy, we can make even more progress toward meeting our goals.
Thank you. And finally, the same question, Mr. Sinesi.
So this is an issue that's really important to me, as I am the father of a child with autism. And I think Burlington did a very good job by him, and staffing was very important. Staffing is very important, remains important. I think that inclusion is important, as Steve had implied, that trying to keep the children with special needs around neurotypical children will help them integrate into society better as they grow up. I also think that Burlington has become an increasingly diverse community where English is not always the first language that's spoken at home. So we need to offer support to enrichment programs to a lot of the students to add to the experiences that they're getting into the classroom. We need to be able to target who those students are and make sure that we're communicating with the parents. And always, I definitely think parental involvement is key on every level, regardless of the student's academic performance level. So making sure that the parents are included as partners.
Thank you. Well, I think we have time for one more question during this round, and for that we'll return to Rich Hosford. Mr. Hosford.
Thank you. I think it's pretty well agreed upon that Burlington has good schools, but things can always get even better. So sort of the opposite of Melissa's last question, what do you think the school department is doing well, and what ideas do you have to build upon that?
And we'll begin with Catherine.
So again, you'd mentioned the schools are excellent. I think what speaks very highly for our school system is that a lot of other school systems look to Burlington in terms of our leadership and technology. We were one of the first schools to implement iPads as far as being able to individualize our teaching to our students and to give our teachers a little bit of freedom in terms of the what they're presenting to the students in terms of what they can learn. I think that that Dr. Conti's done a really good job, in terms of trying to, as far as he's an award-winning superintendent, and again, I think that a lot of school systems are trying to mirror what we're doing. So at this point, that's all I can say.
Okay, thank you. Same question, Adam.
So two things in particular that I think Burlington does a great job at. Obviously, I believe that science, technology, engineering, and math are the wave of the future. They're the wave of the present. That's where our children are going to be. Those are the areas that will make employable people in the world as we send them out beyond graduation. And I think Burlington has an awards-winning robotics program. And I know I'm very familiar with the science program, and I think we do a very good job focusing on those areas. Another area that I think Burlington does a good job is the parent of a child with special needs, but I do believe that there is always room for improvement, is in special needs. And one signature that I would like to put on any school committee that I was part of is making sure as we look to building new buildings that we're including the Disabilities Access Commission, that we're including everyone, that including parents too in the various school districts and the teachers. But I definitely want to make sure that we're extremely mindful of making sure that all children, including those in wheelchairs, have access to the playgrounds. I am very proud of supporting rubberized surfacing at the Pine Glen, where our special needs population in Burlington at the elementary level typically goes to elementary school. I supported the rubberization of the surfacing there as a town meeting member. A lot of people didn't understand why that was necessary, but obviously I'm woke to the needs of the special needs community, having lived it every day of my life at this point. But I definitely want to make this as inclusive so the special needs community feels like they're being advocated for at every level. And I'm that's not a criticism, because at this point they are. I will be one more set of eyes in that role.
Okay, same question, Steve.
Thank you. Well, I don't want to sound like we're bragging when you ask what do we think we're doing very well. I think Mr. Sinesi listed a number of things, as well as Ms. Bond, about what we're doing well. Every year when we're presented with our budgets, there's a need to add staffing, and there's always a pushback, because the general consensus on the town side of government is that they want to maintain level staffing unless you can justify the need. And sometimes there's a lot of surprise when they see the school committee budget, and we've got principals suggesting we need 20 or 22 additional staffing. We can never, of course, afford that within one budget. But I think that perhaps we can do a better job giving more notice to the town about what our needs are and articulating those needs in a better way, rather than doing it in February and March when we're going through the budget. I think it would be helpful if we could articulate those needs in September and have conversations throughout the winter and then throughout the fall and into the winter about why we need more funding to meet the needs. Because they set guidelines in Burlington usually in the fall, and the guidelines are based upon how much they think the tax levy can be supported by commercial and residential property taxes. But sometimes we've done it this year, and we didn't do it as aggressively last year, but sometimes they'll say you're only going to get 3% this year, and we'll tell them it's impossible. You got to give us 3.75, or you got to give us 4.5. I think we need to do a better job getting on top of that need earlier in the budget season.
Thank you. And finally, Carl.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thanks for the question, Rich. I think you're right that Burlington does do a great job in a lot of areas. And one thing that I think that Burlington does particularly well, and well, let me back up for a second. When I'm in the classroom, a lot of times I get questions, "Oh, Mr. Foss, why do we have to learn this? What is this? How is this going to help us?" And what I think Burlington does well is showing students what the things they're learning in the classroom, how they're going to help them, and especially bringing in businesses and allowing students to go out to different businesses. The high school internship program, I think, is fantastic and allows students to get that real-world experience. I know that the middle school, they have had local business leaders come in and present to different classrooms. I think that's fantastic. I really, I love the way that Dr. Conti and the administration has been innovative in allowing that school-business relationship to thrive, and I would like to see that continue and be strengthened. We have a lot of businesses, and they allow the taxpayers to be very generous in providing all the resources that we have in Burlington, and I think that that's something that we do well, but that we could continue to grow and get the kids the real-world experience that's going to benefit them when they get beyond high school.
Thank you very much. Well, for this next round, each of you gets to ask all of the other candidates one question. Again, you'll have 90 seconds to answer. We'll begin. The first question will be from Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. Well, two of the questions I had written out have already been asked. So on the fly, I'm going to ask this one. Are there any policies or procedures of the school committee that you think are inadequate, and that as a school committee member you would propose changing?
And we'll begin with Ms. Bond.
I think I kind of mentioned one of them, and I'm not sure if it's more of a policy for the school committee to put in place in writing and as a policy, or something to go into the handbook for the students. But again, one of my pet peeves when my daughter was going through middle school and high school was how homework was given to the students. There were some issues while she was in school where homework wasn't assigned till 7 or 7:30 at night. Well, when you have after-school activities, you think that you have all your homework done, or you've planned ahead. in terms of, what homework you have to do, and then you're expected to keep checking every, half hour, whatever it is, to make sure that you have all your homework done to hand it in either at midnight or whatever time. So one of the things I'd like to evaluate in more detail and see again if it should be a policy or something more put into the handbook for the students is, having something solid in writing for the teachers, so they know that they have to have the homework either assigned when the students come out of class, like when I was in school, or by 3:30 in the afternoon, something so that everybody knows what the rules are. I'm not, again, I'd prefer if students had time, were able to hand their homework in when they come into class the next day or whenever their next class is. That's what we had. That way you weren't worried about staying up all night trying to do it. Some kids get up early in the morning. They're able to do their homework in the morning. I just want to have the flexibility because
10
right
seconds.
now our students are so stressed. I mean, that's part of the stress. The stress is from, outside influences. But if they, had the time to really understand, when their homework is, what it is, in a timely manner, then I think that would make a big difference.
Thank you. Next, we turn to Mr. Foss.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Great question, Steve. Thank you. One thing that I would love to see the school committee do is actively encourage more civic participation. I know that the minutes are set on or released on the town website. The agenda is released on the town website, especially in the 21st century with the ease of social media. I think that those agendas could be spread further and more people could be made aware of what the committee might be discussing that night at the meeting. I know they released it a couple of days ahead, but it seems like there's only good attendance at meetings when there's some sort of hot button issue. And I would love to see more people involved. That way you get people at the meeting who can ask questions there rather than complain about it later on Facebook. And I think if the school committee was more proactive about encouraging people to go there, and this is a little bit of the civics teacher in me, trying to say to get more people involved to promote that civic engagement, I think that the citizens and the school committee would benefit. It would be a better relationship. And I think that's one way that the school committee could encourage people to get involved.
Thank you. Mr. Sinesi.
I'm going to expand on what Carl said, and it sort of harkens back to something that Steve had said earlier. When it comes to the budgets, I think greater communication, it's something I discussed earlier in this debate, but I think greater communication goes a long way, building bridges or better, more sturdy bridges with town meeting, with the Board of Selectmen. I thought Steve had a great idea when he said, including people in the budget process earlier in the process. And I hope to join you on school committee and be a partner in that realm. I do think that there is always room from a curriculum standpoint to recalibrate the curriculum. Again, science, technology, engineering, and math. Those are 4 important areas, and I think that by virtue of what they are, science and technology, we always need to be taking a look to see where we are and whether we're up to date. I think we should be assessing on a more continuous and ongoing basis what is success with relation to teaching technology in the classroom. How are we assessing the iPad program? And what does it mean to succeed with that program? And again, I think it would just be modernizing some of the practices. When the budget shortfall happened a couple of years ago, and we didn't realize until the fiscal year ended that there was a budget shortfall because
About 10
we were
seconds.
working off of antiquated accounting policies. I don't know, as someone who's not a member of the school committee at this point, where the next shoe could fall, but we just need to always be looking to modernize our infrastructure practices on the business end of the schools.
Thank you. The next question, we turn to Ms. Bond.
So my question is, what role do you believe technology should play in the classroom, and how do you balance that with the current recommendations to limit screen time for kids, even teenagers?
And we begin with Mr. Sinesi.
So I think we should be incorporating technology in the classroom to the greatest of ability, and I think we should be doing it by applying practical, real-world situations at the high school level. At the elementary and middle school level, I think there's room to incorporate some of the everyday curriculum by using the iPads to get the students excited about who are visual learners to possibly learn in a different way, and to use it for educational games that ideally they'll be learning something from, but they'll be also having fun with. And I think the screen time sort of harkens back to what Mrs. Bond had said earlier. I think sending the students home with homework that relies on them to utilize more screen time, it might be best for us as a school system to cap the education with relation to technology during the school day.
Thank you. Mr. Foss, same question?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's a great question, Catherine. Thank you. I believe that there is a role for technology in the classroom, and I am appreciative of the access that students have because of the leadership that Burlington has shown in this realm. I do agree with you that it is concerning because there are a lot of studies on brain development and the dangers of too much screen time. When I was talking to Dr. Conti the other day, we did discuss this idea, and one of the things that he said was it isn't new for kids anymore. A lot of them have these iPads at home, and when they're given a choice, a lot of them run to the alternative. They might, if it's an after-school program, they might go and play instead of using the iPads. If it's in class and it's a younger classroom, they might use blocks, or they might choose something else. And the other thing that he mentioned is that teachers are getting better at using them in a targeted approach. I think in a lot of cases they're finally they're getting the proper training, and in some cases the iPads were just rolled out and the teachers were just given them and saying, figure it out. Now they have proper training there, and that's very important to make sure that they're used in the proper way, and I do believe that it should be in a limited fashion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. I agree with what Mr. Foss has just articulated, and I think it depends on what grade level we're talking about. I think that at the high school level, I think the use of iPads and technology is very important, because when students graduate, that they're going to be living in that world, and I think that they're a little bit more capable of perhaps regulating the amount of time that they're using it. At the middle school level, I think it improves the delivery of instruction. I think a lot of the middle school teachers enjoy using iPads and using technology to develop lessons, and it engages the students more when they're doing that. We do have to be careful about the extent to which we do it, but Burlington was one of the first districts to have one-on-one iPads, and most of the communities in Massachusetts, if not all of them, have done it. I don't know if they all do it K-12 or 1 to 12, but most of them are doing it, and they kind of followed, I think, the lead of Burlington. At the elementary level, I mean, I've talked to teachers who feel like there's not enough old-fashioned writing on real paper, and not doing everything on iPads for kids. It doesn't necessarily develop their hand-eye coordination and their writing abilities. And so I think if we're going to talk about using iPads and technology less, it would be more, in my view, more for the elementary level kids. They're getting it when they go home. They're getting it
10 seconds.
Too much of the time. And I agree with Catherine, the premise of Catherine's question, that we do have to limit it, and I think that would be an important area to do it.
Thank you. Okay, our next question, we turn to Mr. Foss.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We have mentioned RTI several times over the course of this discussion. I'm just curious what the other candidates' thoughts are on the RTI services that we provide in Burlington. Are they used properly in our schools for students with or without a diagnosed disability?
And we start with Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. Excellent question. I was going to ask it myself. Actually, response to intervention, and I agree with something that Mr. Foss said earlier, I think there are a lot of parents out there who don't really understand what it is. but it was brought on by Dr. Conti. It was something that was used in the district where he was an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction before he came to Burlington. And he felt that it was imperative that Burlington start assessing the needs of elementary students earlier in the process. And so he came up with this, he didn't come up with it, he asked the teachers to buy into this RTI program where we try to assess elementary students even as early as kindergarten. We try to assess them early. They take 3 tests a year, or 3 assessments a year. And based upon the results of those assessments, we try to target the instruction that they need in order to get them at grade level and above grade level. So that's what RTI is. And when they say it's a response, that's the targeting to intervention. So I think it's an excellent program. I think the program does require a lot of support, and I've said this all night. I said, we need instructional assistants and tutors. And one of the things that Mr. Sinesi mentioned earlier was the fact that we had a budget overrun. One of the reasons we had that budget overrun was because
10 seconds.
we overran the instructional assistants and the tutor budget. It was for a good reason, but it wasn't properly monitored, and I agree, and we've improved that. But I think that RTI is a great program, and I'd like to see it continue.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Sinesi.
So as a parent, I guess I will say I have benefited from this program because, as I've said before, that I have a son with autism, and he came into the Burlington school system, and he was in the Burlington Early Childhood Center. And obviously from the assessments that were done, he was, the special needs professionals in the Burlington Public Schools, they attempted their best to tailor a curriculum around him. It eventually resulted in him getting an out-of-district placement, which is proper for him. He would require too much attention inside the Burlington Public Schools. But as a school committee member, I would defer to the professionals on this issue, and that would be my management style. I am not a professional educator. I come from the business world. But what my management style would be to ask questions to the professionals, ask them to defend their positions, hear alternative points of view, do a little bit of my own homework, and make a judgment from there, or empower the professionals to make their own judgments. That would be my style to approach this. So thank you.
And finally on this question, Ms. Bond.
Yes, I did talk about it a little bit, and I agree that with what you all have communicated, that I think the teachers understand what it's used for, that maybe some of the parents need to get a better understanding of what it's doing for their children. Again, the testing does occur 3 times a year, like you had mentioned, and I think I'll also agree with you that we need to talk to the teachers and see if that is often enough. Even though it's fluid, where the students are moving back and forth based on their abilities as they move forward in math, or are right at the level where they should be, or they need more help. The kids are constantly moving around, and I think that's great. And they don't have any kind of stigma attached to it either. You're just grouped as you're grouped, and you're moving along. And I think that that's really good because it's helping the kids not feel good about them. They feel good about themselves. The other thing that the program does is it's measuring the effectiveness of the curriculum. And I think that, again, we need to continue to get that feedback. So again, we can help our teachers do what they need to do to make sure our students are getting the best that they possibly can, so that as the kids move on to the next grade, they're better prepared. Again, I think overall it's a great program, and we need to just continue to evaluate that and see if it continues to work for us, and if there's anything else that we can change through suggestions from parents, or looking at other programs that might be different out there that would be better, then we need to continue to do that.
Thank you. Okay, our last question will come from Adam.
All right, so recently I've been to a few school committee meetings, and before I was a candidate, because I applaud the school committee for encouraging participation on the potential new Pine Glen, new Fox Hill. So I attended that meeting, and I've gone to other meetings in the past. So my question is, when was the last time any one of you showed up to a political meeting in town, not as a candidate, but because it was an issue that you cared about? And what was that issue?
And we'll begin with Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Great question, Adam. The school committee meeting last year when the discussion of the population growth and what to do with the elementary schools and the plans. The administration was discussing 4 different plans. That was the meeting I was going to go to, unless my wife hadn't decided that she wanted to go. So she went, and I stayed home with the kids that night. Otherwise, I would have been there. Other political meetings that I've been to include all the town meetings. I have perfect attendance on town meeting, and besides that, it's just school meetings, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, same question. Catherine?
Well, again, I typically, again, because I'm working full-time as you do, I watch them on BCAT as often as I can. I haven't had to really express my voice because, again, my husband is there, and if I have any issues or questions, the same thing. It's not worth both of us going. He can express what I have asked him to ask questions about. I can tell you though that my first experience though with attending a town meeting or a school committee meeting was before my daughter even started school, and it was because I had a question in regards to the cutoff for kids starting kindergarten. And again, I had no perspective on who to talk to, what to do. My daughter was an October child. The cutoff was in August. I knew the state law was December. She had already done kindergarten in private kindergarten, and I wasn't sure if she was going to be bored doing kindergarten again. And so, I stumbled, not being from Burlington, on, how to attend a school committee meeting. And I asked my question, and I have to admit, the school committee answered my questions appropriately. They pulled me aside after we met and explained things, even better to me, and then I was able to make a better decision in terms of what I wanted to do with my daughter. So I've continued to stay involved that way, and being, again, I haven't necessarily, had to
10
go to
seconds.
those meetings, but I can tell you that I'm very involved.
And finally, Steve?
That's an interesting question. I attended a town meeting when the Burlington School Department had no issues before the town meeting, but the subject was the unfunded liability and how the town was going to deal with it. The town had received a report from accountants, and the numbers were all over the place, and there was a great deal of debate that night about how much should the town invest in trying to take care of the unfunded liability for the retirees. But when you're on the school committee, we have 2 meetings a month. We have subcommittee meetings constantly. I'm on the Ways and Means subcommittee. I'm on a bunch of PTO subcommittees. So I'm at meetings all the time. We had a Ways and Means subcommittee meeting last week. We have another Ways and Means subcommittee meeting next week. We've got 3 school committee meetings this month. We present to all of the town meetings except usually the January town meeting. So I would probably say I've attend at least 50 meetings a year being in this position. So if there's something really important, I'll go, but usually I don't have much more time to devote to public meetings. And if there's something significant, oftentimes I'll pick up the phone and call one of the selectmen or one of the members.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the last segment of the evening, closing statements. And as I said earlier, we'll keep the same order as we started with the opening statements. So that means that Mr. Sinesi, you begin.
All right. So I believe that, regardless of what happens in this race, there is going to be a new member of the school committee. And I think I bring the most experience of the candidates on the stage. As I have, I've participated in capital budget, 2 building committees, and obviously buildings are the biggest challenge that's coming through the pipeline for us. Again, I've been on MWRA committee or the water study committee where we've looked at, I've shown through example the leadership style that is a consensus building process that involves communication. Other committees I've been on include the sidewalk committee, I've been a BCAT volunteer and a people helping people volunteer, so I'm out in the community. I believe that I would bring the perspective of a parent, as a parent of a child in the system who was at the Fox Hill School, who was a neurotypical child. I also bring the sensitivity of a parent who has a child with autism who is out of district. So I see things through a lot of different vantage points. I've had a history of taking votes that have mattered at town meeting, like rubberized playground surfaces at the Pine Glen School, a museum elevator so that the Pine Glen School could have their annual field trip to the Burlington Town Museum. And I've supported handicap spaces at the high school, or increased handicap spaces at the high school as a member of town meeting. My background in business has required me to manage budgets, which I think is a skill set that I could bring to the school committee. I would have no conflicts of interest in having to negotiate a contract, as I don't have anyone that works in the system related to me. I'm not a teacher. I've actually carried a union card for a lot of years, so I understand the give and take that is a contract negotiation, and that you need to leave all parties feeling like they've achieved an equitable deal and a fair deal. One other area, and one last area that I'll lead you with, is that, actually a couple of different areas. The theme of my campaign is building the future. And I believe that there's three prongs to that. It's the physical buildings and infrastructure in the Burlington Public Schools. It's planning with curriculums that involve science, technology, engineering, and math, and recalibrating those curriculums to teach to a successful future for our students. And lastly, I think it's time that we formed a generational bridge. It's time for our generation to really step up and elect one of our own to the school committee. We can't continue. We value experience in Burlington, and I applaud the existing school committee for their experience. But we've got a school committee that is, they're aging. We can't expect them to do this for another 5 or 10 years, or we're going to end up with a school committee that doesn't have a lot of experience. I believe I have experience now to serve in this role, and I believe I could be that bridge to the next generation, and I hope to mentor those who come up behind me. And I look forward to the possibility of working with those who have experience in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you. Final comments, Stephen Nelson.
I want to thank you all at home for watching the debate this evening. I want to thank BCAT for hosting us and the press for their insightful questions, and Mr. Moderator for moderating this event this evening. I hope all of the voters in Burlington will go out on April 4th and cast a vote, and I'm asking you to kindly cast one of your votes for me. I think that I'm the most qualified candidate on the dais. I've got over 20 years of experience serving as a school committee member. Experience is not tantamount to being too old to serve on a committee. Experience is what delivers results for students. If you were going to a doctor, you wouldn't want a doctor who was fresh out of medical school to perform open heart surgery. You'd want a doctor with experience and training and education who knew what he was doing. Over the years, I've reviewed in excess of 25 budgets, either as a Ways and Means Committee member or as a school committee member. I've been involved in multiple school renovation projects. I've been advocating for students for over 24 years on the school committee, and I get results. As I said earlier, I was instrumental in getting the accommodated budget set up so that our out-of-district placement students would have proper funding and proper transportation over the years. I've advocated increases in staffing. We have multiple needs right now for our children with learning issues. We need to get more instructional assistants, and we need to get additional nurses as soon as possible to meet those needs. As I said, I've served on other town budgets, town committees over the years. And in closing, I said right from the outset, student mental health is one of the most important issues that the school committee is facing. We need to make sure that we have proper supports in place going forward. We need somebody who's got experience and understands the issues. And we need someone who knows how to address those issues properly. The role of a school committee member is primarily to advocate for proper funding for the running of the school system, to hire superintendents, and to set policies. school committee members are not charged by law in Massachusetts with micromanaging the
About 10
administration. We rely on experts, as individuals have said earlier tonight. We rely on experts. We hire good administrators, and we monitor how they perform. We evaluate how they perform. And I think in our case, this committee has one of the best superintendents in the country. Thank you.
Closing statements. Catherine Bond.
So I will kind of mirror some of what you were just saying. The job of the school committee is to select or terminate the superintendent, review and approve budgets, and establish educational goals and policies. And if elected, I will adhere to those guidelines. Again, as far as experience, I've served on the BHS School Council for the last 4 years, which has given me a unique experience in terms of being able to communicate back and forth between the principal and the guidance department. As far as my business experience, I was a business development manager prior to working for Raytheon, which exposed me to proposals and contracts. The finance side, of course, being treasurer for the Winchester Figure Skating Club. And then other leadership roles, of course, would be the other board of directors that I've served on. So my goal really is to ensure that we educate and support all of our students as they move from each level. And we can facilitate this by ensuring that our teachers get the support that they need through attending seminars, providing them the right support and tools for training. We need to continue to support inclusion of all of our students and to create a culture of kindness. We also need to be fiscally responsible when we create budgets. Current studies, as I've mentioned earlier, our students are stressed. We need to continue to evaluate the situation. Ensure our students that are at risk get the support that they need, and that we need to make sure our students have the right support and training for these at-risk students if they ask for help. I would also like to thank the town meeting for all of their support of the schools, especially for their financial support. I look forward to continue the great relationship between the school committee, the Board of Selectmen, the town administrator, the financial teams, and all of the town employees. I believe I'm the best new person for this open seat because I'm an involved parent of a recent graduate, and I do have a broad understanding of experience of K through 12 and beyond. My goal is to protect your children. I said I want to provide the best possible education for your child and for every child we serve. I ask for your to consider casting one vote of your 2 of school committee votes for me on April 4th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Kyle Foss, your closing statements.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to thank BCAT for hosting us tonight. Alan, thank you for moderating. Melissa, Chris, and Rich, thanks for the great questions. And my fellow candidates, thank you for, as past history has shown, some great debates for school committee. I'm very happy that it's a contested race this year, not because it's more work for any of us and myself, but because it gives the voters of town a healthy choice and some ideas. The contested election makes us debate these ideas and talk about the things that are important for schools and for our children. I'm going to circle back to what I said at the beginning. My life experiences make me the best candidate for school committee this cycle. As a father, again, I have a personal interest in continuing to make sure that the schools in Burlington are the positive, the productive places that we have come to know. As a teacher, I have the insights on the trends and issues that face schools every day, the struggles that teachers go through, the problems that administration has to deal with, just the day-to-day operations of schools. I'm familiar with that world, and I can be an advocate for the professionals that work in our school district. As a town meeting member, I can bridge that gap as well, bringing the perspective of the budget cycle, of listening to the budget presentations, and making the decisions as the town meeting body to approve the budget of the schools. It is a significant portion of the town budget, and one of the 3 roles of the school committee is to approve that budget, and I believe I can make bring a fresh voice and a strong voice to that process. The other 2 parts of the school committee responsibilities are to hire the superintendent. I think Dr. Conti is doing a great job, and I support his and his administration's efforts. and to set policy. Again, with my education background, I feel I can bring a strong voice to making sure that the policies of the Burlington schools continue to move upward and onward. I will close by saying my duty as a civics teacher, the deadline to register to vote is tomorrow, so make sure you get down to Town Hall and make sure you're registered if you aren't already. I humbly ask for one of your votes on April 4th, and thank you again. Good night.
Great. Well, we've reached the end of the discussions. In closing, I thank all four of the candidates, Stephen Nelson, Catherine Bond, Kyle Foss, and Adam Sinesi, not only for sharing their vision with the people of Burlington, but also for offering their time and service to the town. Thank you, Melissa Russell of the Burlington Union, and Chris Huffaker of the Burlington Patch, and Rich Hosford of B News. And finally, thank you to Jen Dodge and all of the crew and volunteers here at BCAT. Remember, Election Day is Saturday, April 4th. The polls at the high school are open until 8 p.m. Here's your chance to have a say in how your town is governed. Make sure you take advantage of that. Don't pass it up. Get out and vote.